Mrs. Chen from 1247 Maple Drive appeared at the pool gate like a materializing ghost, her phone already recording. Karen's stomach dropped as she realized the elderly woman had witnessed everything from her kitchen window, which offered a perfect view of the community pool area. "Turn that thing off," Karen commanded, marching toward the fence. "This is HOA business. This is child abuse," Mrs. Chen replied calmly, her steady hands keeping the phone trained on Karen's flushed face. "And I'm documenting it." The word abuse hit Karen like a physical blow. She stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the pool skimmer she'd been wielding earlier like some sort of weapon. "I was enforcing community standards. These children were swimming without proper supervision." "You pushed a 7-year-old into deep water," Mrs. Chen said, her voice carrying the weight of indisputable fact. "I saw everything." Karen's carefully constructed world began tilting sideways. In her mind, she'd been the neighborhood guardian, the protector of property values and community standards. She'd spent months documenting every violation: grass a 1/4 inch too high, Christmas decorations left up past January 2nd, basketball hoops positioned 6 inches too close to the sidewalk. She'd built elaborate spreadsheets tracking compliance rates and drafted lengthy emails about the importance of maintaining their premium residential environment. But now, watching Tommy Martins still sniffling while his sister protectively held his hand, Karen saw herself through different eyes. When had enforcing rules become more important than basic human decency? "The security patrol is coming," she said weakly, as if this somehow justified her actions. "Good," Mrs. Chen replied. "They'll need to see this footage." More neighbors were gathering now. The Johnsons from the corner house, still in their work clothes. Young Mrs. Patterson with her baby strapped to her chest. Even grumpy Mr. Kozlov, who usually only emerged from his house to yell at people about their trash can placement, stood at his fence line watching the scene unfold. Karen felt their collective gaze like spotlights. These were the same people who'd voted her into the HOA presidency, though she was beginning to suspect it was less about confidence in her leadership and more about nobody else wanting the thankless job. "Karen," Mrs. Patterson called out, her voice gentle but firm. "What happened here?" The question hung in the air like humidity. Karen opened her mouth to explain about regulations and liability and the sacred duty of maintaining community standards, but instead, she heard herself saying, I made a mistake." The admission shocked her more than anyone else. Karen Whitmore didn't make mistakes. Karen Whitmore identified problems and implemented solutions. Karen Whitmore protected property values and upheld standards. But standing there in the blazing afternoon sun, watching a 7-year-old boy she'd traumatized, Karen felt something cracking inside her chest. "We need to call the boy's parents," Mrs. Chen said, lowering her phone, but not putting it away. Karen's face went white. The Martinez family lived in the modest townhomes on the east side of the development, the ones she tried to have rezoned as temporary housing during her first year as president. She'd made their lives difficult with noise complaints and parking citations, always hiding behind the shield of community standards. Now she'd have to face them as the woman who'd put her hands on their child. Karen Whitmore's manicured finger trembled as she jabbed the emergency button on her phone, watching 3 soaking wet children scramble out of the Meadowbrook community pool like startled otters. The splash echoed in her mind, not from their initial jump, but from when she had grabbed little Tommy Martinez by his SpongeBob swim trunks and physically hurled him into the deep end. "This is HOA President Karen Whitmore," she barked into the phone, her voice cracking despite her attempt at authority. "I need the community security patrol at the pool immediately. We have trespassers." The word trespassers stuck in her throat like peanut butter. She knew exactly who these kids were, the Martinez twins and their friend from 3 streets over. She'd seen them playing in their own yards countless times during her evening compliance walks. But rules were rules, and the pool hours clearly stated adult supervision required for minors under 16. "Ma'am, what's the nature of the emergency?" the security dispatcher asked. Karen watched the children huddle together near the pool gate, their eyes wide with confusion and fear. Tommy, the boy she'd pushed, was crying silently, pressing his small hands against the chain-link fence like a trapped animal. His sister Maria had her arm around him, whispering something Karen couldn't hear, but could feel burning into her chest. Unauthorized pool usage, Karen said, her voice growing shriller. Violation of HOA Regulation 47B. These children are. They're destroying our property values. Even as the words left her mouth, Karen knew how ridiculous they sounded. The children hadn't been doing anything except swimming on a scorching July afternoon, when every air conditioner in the neighborhood was working overtime. But she'd spent 3 years clawing her way to HOA president, enduring countless neighborhood meetings, where people rolled their eyes at her suggestions and whispered behind their hands when she spoke. The dispatcher's pause felt eternal. Someone will be out in 20 minutes. 20 minutes. Karen looked at her watch. 2:47 p.m. By the time security arrived, these kids would probably be long gone, safely tucked away in their homes where she couldn't touch them. The thought should have relieved her, but instead, it filled her with a strange panic. 20 minutes? She shrieked. This is a serious violation. These children could have drowned under my watch. Do you understand the liability issues here? But even as she spoke about liability and regulations, Karen's mind kept replaying the moment she put her hands on Tony Martinez. The shocked gasp from his sister, the way his small body had hit the water with a splash that seemed to echo louder than thunder, the look in his dark eyes when he'd surfaced, sputtering and confused, not understanding why the mean lady from the big house had hurt him. What had she done? Detective Rodriguez arrived before the HOA security patrol, which immediately told Karen everything she needed to know about how seriously this situation was being taken. She watched from her poolside chair, the same throne from which she'd surveyed her domain for 3 years, as he spoke quietly with the Martinez children and Mrs. Chen. Mrs. Whitmore. Detective Rodriguez approached with the measured steps of someone who dealt with neighborhood disputes before, but his expression suggested this was different. I need to ask you some questions. Karen's mouth went dry. She'd called 911 dozens of times during her tenure as HOA president. Noise complaints, suspected property violations, unleashed dogs. But she'd never been on the receiving end of official scrutiny. I was enforcing pool regulations, she began, but he held up a hand. Let's start with what happened in your own words. As Karen recounted the events, she watched Detective Rodriguez's face carefully. He maintained professional neutrality, but she caught the slight tightening around his eyes when she described grabbing Tommy and pushing him into the pool. The words sounded different when spoken aloud to a police officer, less like rule enforcement and more like assault. The child couldn't touch the bottom? Detective Rodriguez asked. Karen's voice became smaller. I didn't think about that. The truth was, she'd been so consumed with righteous indignation about the rule violation that she hadn't considered Tommy's safety at all. She'd seen non-compliance and reacted with the fury of someone whose authority had been questioned. The fact that he was 7 years old, barely 4 feet tall, and alone in water over his head hadn't entered her calculations. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm going to need you to come with me to answer some additional questions. The words hit her like ice water. Am I under arrest? Not at this time. But we need to complete our investigation. Karen looked around the pool area that had been her kingdom. The neighbors were still watching, some recording with their phones now. The Martinez children had been taken home by their frantically worried parents, who'd arrived 20 minutes earlier in a panic. Mrs. Chen stood nearby, her phone footage already uploaded to the neighborhood social media group, where Karen knew it would spread like wildfire. Her HOA presidency, her reputation, her carefully constructed image as the neighborhood's moral guardian, it was all dissolving faster than chlorine tablets in summer heat. I need to lock up the pool, she said absurdly, as if maintaining this one last protocol would somehow restore order to her collapsing world. The pool will be fine, Mrs. Whitmore. As she walked toward Detective Rodriguez's car, Karen caught sight of her reflection in the pool house window. She looked exactly like what she was, a middle-aged woman who let a little bit of power go to her head and had forgotten that rules were supposed to serve people, not the other way around. The worst part wasn't the potential charges or the humiliation or even the certain end of her HOA career. The worst part was the memory of Tommy Martinez's confused, frightened face as he'd surfaced from the water, looking at her like she was a monster. Maybe she was. 3 days later, Karen sat in her empty house, staring at the stack of resignation letters piled on her kitchen table. Not just her own HOA resignation, though that had been the first one she'd written, but resignations from every committee, board, and neighborhood organization she'd been part of for the past 5 years. The doorbell rang, and Karen's stomach clenched. Since the incident, she'd been receiving a steady stream of visitors. Some came to express their shock and disappointment. Others came to tell her they'd always known she was trouble. A few came to quietly share their own stories about times she'd made their lives difficult with overzealous rule enforcement. But when she opened the door, she found Mrs. Martinez standing on her porch with Tommy beside her. Karen's knees nearly gave out. Mrs. Martinez, I'm so sorry. I don't know what came over me. May we come in? Mrs. Martinez asked, her voice carefully neutral. They sat in Karen's living room, the same room where she planned countless neighborhood improvement campaigns. Tommy stayed close to his mother, but he wasn't crying anymore. He looked at Karen with the frank curiosity children reserve for adults who've done incomprehensible things. I wanted to talk to you, Mrs. Martinez began, because Tommy has been asking questions I don't know how to answer. Karen felt her chest tighten. What kind of questions? He wants to know why you pushed him. He thinks he did something wrong. The words hit Karen harder than any legal consequence could have. She looked at Tommy, really looked at him, and saw not a rule violator or a threat to property values, but a little boy who just wanted to swim on a hot day. Tommy, Karen said, her voice barely above a whisper, you didn't do anything wrong. I did something very wrong. I was angry about grown-up things that had nothing to do with you, and I took that anger out on you. That was not okay. Tommy considered this with the seriousness children bring to important conversations. Are you sorry? I'm very sorry. More sorry than I've ever been about anything. Mrs. Martinez watched this exchange with careful eyes. The district attorney decided not to press charges, given that you're seeking counseling, and this appears to be an isolated incident. Karen nodded. The court-mandated anger management classes were already scheduled, along with therapy sessions she'd voluntarily arranged. But she knew that legal absolution didn't equal moral forgiveness, from the community or from herself. There's something else, Mrs. Martinez continued. The neighborhood association is forming a new committee to review HOA regulations. They want to make sure the rules serve families, not the other way around. Karen understood the implicit message. The old guard was out. The rigid enforcement era was over. A new approach was beginning. One that might actually build community instead of policing it. That sounds good, Karen said carefully. As Mrs. Martinez and Tommy prepared to leave, the boy turned back to Karen with that unfiltered directness children possess. Will you still be mean to kids? He asked. Karen knelt to his eye level, feeling the full weight of the moment. No, Tommy. I promise I'll never hurt another child, and I'm going to work very hard to be a better person. Tommy nodded solemnly, apparently satisfied with this answer. After they left, Karen returned to her kitchen table and the resignation letters. But instead of mailing them, she opened her laptop and began typing something new, a letter to the neighborhood newsletter, requesting space to publicly apologize and propose a new approach to community leadership. The pool incident had ended her reign as HOA president, but maybe, just maybe, it could be the beginning of her redemption as a neighbor. Outside her window, she could hear children playing in the distance, their laughter carrying on the summer breeze like a reminder of what really mattered.